The use of deadly force by police is fueling the debate about police brutality and racism, increasing pressure on police and politicians to push for reform. The Justice in Policing Act, passed by the House, is a comprehensive bill aimed at saving lives, but it faces some major hurdles ahead. Dr. David Thomas is a professor of forensic studies and criminal justice at Florida Gulf Coast University. He's also a veteran police officer specializing in mental health, active shooters, and police and minority relations. Dr. Thomas, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
What is the data telling us about the use of excessive force and racial bias in the U.S.? Is the trend of deadly encounters with police on the rise, or are we just bearing witness to much more of it?
Well, I'm going to shock you because there actually is no real data. In the United States, there's only two resources where data is actually captured, and that is by the Washington Post and the Guardian, which I believe is a British newspaper. And so every shooting that occurs, they actually capture that shooting, and they write a small synopsis of the incident. And you really have to go through and decipher if it was a legitimate use of force or if it was excessive force. So there is no real data. The FBI, I think in the last year, they were tasked with, I think this year or next year, they will start keeping data of police shootings. So you'll have a better idea of what actually happens, but I don't think you'll really get a true sense of how good or bad it is. The second part of the question is, you're starting to see more of it because of phones and because of video and because people are posting it. But understand, these are the same issues that minority communities have been complaining about for years. When I was a kid growing up in Detroit and witnessed and was a victim of the abuse, it was exactly the same thing. And the Black community, minority communities complained about it, but it fell on deaf ears. There is a segment of our society in this country that believes that law enforcement, you won't have any contact with law enforcement if you didn't do anything wrong. Well, that's absolutely positively not true. And it's now people are starting to see, since the death of Eric Garner, where he was choked to death, and George Floyd, now people are starting to recognize that, yeah, there is a problem. But this problem has been going on for years.
Well, lack of data is certainly a problem as well. I mean, cultural diversity training's been going on for decades. Is there evidence or any data that says that creating a more diverse police force or mandatory cultural awareness training has any effect on the attitudes of police officers?
We like to think that by having a police force that is representative of the community that it serves, is going to have an impact. And the thing that what likes to be argued, or what isn't argued often, is that people don't talk about the culture of policing. So, and I'll give you an example. I'm a Black man. I was a Black man in the 70s and all my life. But really, if you go back to when I started, it was tough. It was tough because the question was I one of them? Meaning, was I a product of the street, or was I a law enforcement officer? And somehow those two things didn't mesh well because color seemed to always get in the way. And so as much as administrations and chiefs would say, we want a diverse force, then there's some resistance within the ranks that force is diverse as they possibly could want it to be. That is oftentimes a struggle. Minorities are oftentimes promoted, but then they're asked, the question becomes, are they promoted because of their knowledge base and their skill set, or are they promoted because they're a minority? Trust me, policing, the rank and file of policing is no different than our society. It is a microcosm of our society. As far as training goes, I don't know if training really has an impact. In the 90s, I was actively involved in diversity training here in the state of Florida. And, the officers hated it. They absolutely positively hated it because they looked at it as the agency or the organization calling them racist, and their minds weren't open to change. And I can even give you a recent, I was talking to a lieutenant from another agency within the last 2 weeks. And the chief had this edict where he wants community and police officers to get together and have a talk. Not the chief, not the brass, the officers. So he started with his sergeants, and they met with community members. And the community members had a pretty good understanding of what our history was, meaning that how blacks have been view police and how far back it goes. And one of the community members stated, they made a very honest statement, is that you need to understand why black people view policing the way they do. And it's because it dates back to when cops were part of the slave patrols. Well, that went from being an open and understanding group of cops to this. And on break, they're calling us a bunch of racists. So when they got back together to sit down and have the rest of the conversation, it was done because the cops were so jaded, they didn't want to understand or recognize that we're not calling you racist, but this is the history. And these are the conversations that have gone on in our families for years, for centuries. And we want to fix this. That was the end of the conversation. So that kind of gives you some idea of how difficult this is.
Not terribly effective, that's for sure. But when it comes to the use of excessive force, what about checks and balances within law enforcement? Derek Chauvin had multiple complaints against him well before he put his knee on George Floyd's neck. Is the performance and the record of a police officer monitored in any way, shape, or form?
It depends. And it depends on where you are in this country. In the state of Florida, every incident, everything that you do, literally, because we're an open record state, that has to stay in your personnel file. Not much different than what Chauvin, because he had 13 violations, and they all stayed in his personnel jacket. The question is, how powerful is the union? And so the unions carry a lot of clout, and they will fight for you, which makes no sense to me. Even when there is a bad apple and that person should go, they oftentimes can win the person's job back through arbitration. So punishment will be, we'll give you 10 days off, we'll give you 5 days off. And theoretically, in a good agency, there should be progressive discipline, meaning that once you get to a certain number of points because you had so many violations, then it's automatic termination. But the union has a lot of clout, and I've seen it happen where, like in Chauvin's case, I've seen it happen in New York in the Eric Garner case. You see time after time when guys are disciplined and they're allowed to stay on, and they should have been fired. But a lot of that has to do with the unions.
So Breonna Taylor was shot as she slept, and there were no repercussions or accountability in that case. What is your position on the no-knock warrants, and where do you think that's headed?
I don't know if there is a clear-cut answer for no-knock warrants, and I'll explain why they exist. The reason that no-knock warrants exist is because when we have kicked in doors and we're banging on the door, the drug dealer is flushing the drugs down the toilet, or they're getting weapons to attack as we are attempting to execute the warrant. So the idea is to catch people by surprise. You do it at 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning when you know they're asleep, so that you don't have that type of resistance, so that you get in, get what you want, and get what you need. The issue with Breonna Taylor is when I review the case, is they're police officers, but they're not SWAT guys. They're not the tactical guys that have the skill set. And this has become a truly unnecessary skill set. I know every place I've worked, we've executed warrants, SWAT team has done it. The detectives do the work, or the officers do the work to get the warrant, and they give it to the SWAT team because all they got to do, all their job is secure the building to make sure nobody gets hurt. And then the rest of it is me or other officers going in to do the search and to recover what we've come to recover. The interesting part is right after Breonna Taylor, last month, I believe, 2 FBI agents, 3 or 4 went to a house in South Florida. They went to kick in the door and they knocked on the door, but the suspect saw them through his Ring doorbell, opened fire, and killed the agent. Well, if you had a trained team, they had the intelligence information up front. Since this is Bluetooth, you would be able to shut down that camera before you kick the door. So it shows that they're as much as we'd like to get rid of it, and I know some states will and some cities will, but it also can be very detrimental to both sides, the people on either side of that door. And so I think that's going to be the struggle. The difficult part is trying to find the balance.
Well, in the wake of George Floyd's death, an executive order was signed actually outlining priorities for police reform, including the creation of a police misconduct database and new guidelines for the use of force and de-escalation. Do you think that that has had any impact at all? Have use of force policies changed, in your opinion?
Nope, and they won't. Because you'll see some statute, like California created a newfangled statute. But when it gets down to it, I guess the question, when we talk about use of force, and I'll start with deadly force. When you get to that, the issue of deadly force, what kind of limits do you put on that other than the standard, which has been abused for decades in these last few 10, 15 years of, I was in fear of my life. Well, there's not a whole lot of articulation that goes into that. All I have to do is say I'm scared and I can shoot somebody. All right. So I think the justification is we're looking to find a way to make them justify why they have to use force and have to use deadly force. The other part of that is when, as I kind of look at the way the federal government is doing business, it depends on who's the gatekeeper in this country. Under President Obama, we had this thing of 21st century policing, and it was pushing policing in the right direction to kind of change use of force. It was really a new beginning, and they were holding police departments and cities accountable by suing them when they had been in violations of citizens' civil rights through consent decrees. And they would make agreements, and during those agreements, then they would have to acquiesce, the city and the agency would have to acquiesce and change policies and change everything, like the IA investigations. When they find that agencies are finding on behalf of the cops 99% of the time, and that's just not true. So they pushed to do all of these things. As soon as President Trump came in and Sessions as the Attorney General, the gatekeeper changed. And Sessions actually wrote a memo that said, we are no longer going to police local law enforcement in local cities. That local matters are local matters. And so he signed an order, the Attorney General did, where there are no more consent decrees. So the question has to become, who's going to watch the police? Even in the death of Eric Garner, where he was choked to death, and this was done during the Obama administration, believe me, he still was not criminally charged. Now, if you put those two incidents, Garner and Floyd, side by side, there's literally no difference. And one person, he ultimately got fired after 9 years from the agency, which just happened. But there were no federal charges brought.
Well, you would think that the use of body cams would be one of the easiest interventions to enhance accountability, but not necessarily according to what you're saying. But what is the status of the use of police body cams in the U.S., and are they at least a part of the solution?
They are a part of the solution. The problem is that for small agencies, they are literally cost prohibitive. And by that I mean, it's great to have the body cam, but now you have to have the infrastructure to maintain the data. And so that's a whole nother cost that most agencies and the public is not aware of. And so when you talk about body cams, it's great, but the infrastructure maintenance, I know some agencies getting into them have cost them at the beginning, it's like $1 million. To replace them after 2 years is another $1 million. And so just think about that cost. Is it worth it? Absolutely. But the agencies who some of them have been kind of hanging on with a prayer financially, and now this actually becomes a huge challenge for them.
So in your experience, what are the steps? Are there steps to fair and impartial policing, and are there strategies that address capacity to build trust in diverse communities?
Sure. We'll go back. I'll say the first aspect, or at least a good beginning, is training. And when I say training, I don't mean coming in and having somebody walk in and call everybody a bunch of racists, but talk about bias and fair policing. Be able to stand in front of the group and talk about issues in policing. But here's the rub with cops, with American cops for sure, is that if you don't come from that cut, meaning if you were never a law enforcement officer, that group is very hard to want to listen to you. They won't. So if you have old guys that literally come in with good programs and good training, they are willing to sit and listen. And the training can be effective because it actually touches, they understand because you've been there and you've done it. The other part to that is the communities. What do the communities want? American policing is getting hung out to dry right now because they have killed so many people who have mental health issues. And so a part of that is there's a program in Portland, Oregon called Cahoots, where they have a mental health clinician and a paramedic or EMT actually ride in a van together, and they respond to all of those, most of those calls for service. They very rarely do they have to call law enforcement in order to be a part of those calls. So policing has to kind of reimagine itself and rethink it. I've talked to chiefs and sheriffs who argue that the issue of mental health is that, you just can't send civilians out there. They're going to get killed. Well, really? The civilians deal with mental health issues day in and day out in hospitals. They deal with them everywhere else. So you kind of you need to rethink how you're going to do that. So when we talk, the other thing is people want to defund the police. So let me kind of dispel that or kind of put the brakes on that a little bit, at least address it. If defunding means reallocation of funds to kind of create new programs that deal with the homeless and deal with mental health issues, that's great. And if you can keep police actively involved in that, that's great. But on the other side of that, if you're talking about truly just taking money away from them because you want to punish them, then what happens is you end up with officers that aren't trained. The quality and level of service that you're going to get is not good. So you want the same level of service, you want to feel protected. So there has to be a balance. And so when I said earlier about reimagine, they literally are going to have to sit at the table with citizens and reimagine what they want policing to be in their communities.
Well, this is clearly one of those debates that is going to be ongoing for quite a period of time. Encouraging to hear, though, that there are interventions that are working in policing, and we're so glad that you would share your expertise with Newspoint 360 today. We really appreciate it, Dr. Thomas.
You're welcome.